Well, I hate to say I told you so, but here we are. Facebook shuts down anti-quarantine protests at state's request. That's right. Protesters challenging their government using their First Amendment right are having their events shut down on Facebook because the states are asking for it. Facebook straight up said, if the government doesn't allow it, we won't allow the events. The government can't restrict it. They don't have the right to do so, but they're doing it anyway. And you know what? Here comes the media to gleefully insult all of the people fighting for their constitutional rights. Why? They're conservatives. Was the media ragging on the rent strikers or the labor strikers? No, they weren't. When protests started earlier this month and late March from, say, Lyft drivers or janitors or rent strikers, the media didn't say anything about social distancing. I mean, very little. Now that Trump supporters are coming out and they're saying it's time to lift the lockdowns, all of the media, they can't help but say, look at these dumb people. They're going to get sick and get me sick, and so are everyone else. But the big issue right now, our ability to speak. You see, the First Amendment restricts what the government can do pertaining to speech. So something miraculous happened. I'm not going to insinuate that it was intentional, like there's some globalist plot. But as Facebook became more and more powerful, it began to monopolize how we speak to each other. The same is true for YouTube. Now, both of these platforms do afford me the ability to actually speak to you, so there is a greater net positive than a net negative. Without YouTube, you wouldn't hear this at all. So at least we have that. But the problem we're faced with is that the government knows they can't shut down these protests, but they can request a private company shut down our ability to communicate. They have monopolized how we talk to each other. We used to go to the water cooler, to town hall, to the churches, to the community centers. Now we're on Facebook, and people aren't doing those other things as often. Organizing is taking place on social media. Social media then bans whoever they want, very politically biased, and they can. And yes, these people supposedly on the left who are supposed to be fighting for civil rights do just the opposite. You know, the best example is there's an organization called Free Press. I kid you not. And they actually advocate for the banning of alternative media they don't like. I'll put it that way. Recently, they wanted the FCC to actually regulate some news media. And the FCC was like, we're not going to do that. So they're the opposite of the free press. That's what you get. They claim to fight for liberty, but they're authoritarian as they come. They have been defending Facebook and YouTube and Twitter the entire time these organizations have been silencing and censoring people. And they're still doing it. It's not just Facebook. YouTube has basically said, if you go against the World Health Organization, you are in violation of their guidelines. And there we have it. An organization that even Wired magazine has said was lying to us, who is having its funding cut off because the U.S. government has said they were providing us with misinformation. YouTube is now saying, if you don't listen to what they say, you're in violation. All right, we'll see how long this lasts. Maybe I won't be on YouTube for that much longer. I want to show you this, all these stories. Facebook shuts down anti-quarantine protests at states' requests. The social network has already removed protest messages in California, New Jersey, and Nebraska. They say Facebook is blocking anti-quarantine protesters from using the site to organize in-person gatherings in states that require residents to stay in their homes due to the coronavirus pandemic. Require? The world's largest social network has already removed protest messages in California, Jersey, Nebraska from its site at the urging of state governments who say those events are prohibited by stay-at-home orders, a company spokesman said. No, they're not, you fascists. That is not how this country works. I want to see lawsuits. I didn't organize the protests, but I want to see people sue. The government requesting Facebook remove these protests, I would believe would still violate the First Amendment. Now, they're not directly intervening in the protests, but they are intervening in protest activities, which includes posting messages on Facebook. So please, if you're involved in this, why don't you stand up for it? They say, quote, unless government prohibits the event during this time, we allow it to be organized on Facebook. For this same reason, events that defy government's guidance on social distancing aren't allowed on Facebook, the spokesperson said. Absolutely disgusting. Protesters have gathered in state capitals around the country in recent days to push back against the government's decisions to close non-essential businesses and requiring students to largely isolate at home as the nationwide death toll from the coronavirus outbreak approaches 40,000. Those protests have been fueled in part by President Donald Trump, who has wavered between urging governors to reopen their economies and deferring to state leaders to make such calls. In a series of tweets last week, Trump issued a call to liberate Michigan, Virginia, and Minnesota. Well, I want to show you all these other protests, but first, take a look at this story from Reclaim the Net. YouTube CEO. Anything that goes against the World Health Organization is a violation of YouTube policies. YouTube is also giving legacy media outlets and public health organizations billions of impressions. I love it. Yep, listen. If you go to youtube.com, you might see, typically this is where people find these videos. I'd be willing to bet that many of you found this video by going to youtube.com and it pops up in the on the homepage. Now, I earned that to an extent. YouTube chooses who they think is good content, and they choose what they think you might like, and they put it on the front page so that you can see it. And if you click it, YouTube actually gives me more reach. So if the thumbnail is good, and I don't really put thumbnails on these videos, but the title is good, people click it and they watch it for a certain amount of time. YouTube weighs that against other content. So it is a meritocracy. But of course, as we know, when it comes to major corporations and cronyism, the major media networks, they get guarantees. They get rules for me and not for them. So if you go to youtube.com, you'll see CNN, MSNBC, CBS, these big networks, they get their own special section where live coverage is skyrocketing. YouTube has said that they're seeing a 75% increase in views to authoritative sources. That means they decide who is authoritative. And it's funny because guess who it tends to be? CNN. CNN gets to be authoritative, even though they're doing performative nonsense. CNN doesn't even have real ratings except for YouTube. This is the most annoying thing. YouTube is shaking in their boots because they could lose advertisers when the media writes bad things about them. So they give extra power to these media companies. It's insane. Just stop doing it and let them die off. But sure enough, here's what they say. In terms of specific YouTube stats, Wojcicki, however you pronounce her name, Wojcicki said, there's been a 75% increase in views for authoritative sources since the start of 2020. Public health organizations have had over 10 billion impressions. That means nothing, by the way. The coronavirus news shelf has been viewed over 10 billion times. That means YouTube is giving billions of views to mainstream media who is late on this and who is authoritarian. So I will say this. I don't normally say this in these videos, but if you like my content, I need you to help share because YouTube actively suppresses content like mine and many other independent commentators. If you think we do a better job than the mainstream media, well, they're getting put on the front page. The only way to bypass that, the best way, is through direct sharing. If you share this video, then that's one person sharing a video to their 300 friends or whatever is substantially more reach than YouTube just putting someone on the front page. It's really powerful. Wojcicki also touched on controversial changes YouTube has made over the last couple of years, which have resulted in many creators being demonetized, having their content removed, or even having their entire channels deleted. The YouTube CEO framed these changes as progress and said they've created an environment where if you talk to most people, it's really hard, if not possible, to find misinformation. Well, if that's the case, then I guess I can appreciate them basically saying my channel is not misinformation. During the second half of the interview, Wojcicki praised YouTube's use of machines to review and take down content and claimed that they have been able to continue to be really effective during this time. A reversal of the platform's previous sentiment that relying on automated systems during the pandemic will result in more deleted videos, including those that don't violate community guidelines. So that's the other part. She says, when it comes to determining what YouTube classes as misinformation, Wojcicki said that anything that would go against the World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy. The World Health Organization was recommending we don't lock down travel back in January. So yes, I got demonetized when I criticized them, and it took like 2 months for them to remove the restriction, even though I was right. They're doing a terrible job. CNN is doing a terrible job. YouTube, stop propping them up. You are actively hurting society. I'm not even going to get into the whole authoritarian versus libertarian argument in this point. If you want people to actively shelter in place to avoid the coronavirus pandemic, you got to stop showing CNN because they've been wrong about this. The Washington Post, all these outlets were saying Trump was wrong. They were criticizing the lockdowns. So if you got a problem with Trump's attitude, and I think it's worth criticizing, but you wanted to see us lock down sooner than we did, sooner than any other country, then you got to get rid of these people, because it was independent commentary on your platform, YouTube, that was saying we needed to do something. It was Senator Tom Cotton in January saying we needed to do something on Facebook in a viral video. Yet they propped up the mainstream media and the Democratic establishment who were wrong about this. Nancy Pelosi, February 24th, encouraging people to go out into Chinatown. Bill de Blasio on March 3rd doing the exact same thing. And where was YouTube to stop misinformation? Peddling it. So no, I'm not going to sit here and just accept this. But what else can we do? YouTube is on the wrong side of this because they are scared of weak, pathetic outlets like performative CNN. Let me show you what's going on. I like local news outlets, by the way. I often praise them because they're not playing the national politic BS. Here's a story from KQED. Coronavirus shelter in place. SF janitors protest cuts to working hours during coronavirus shelter in place. Headline got cut off. You can see these people, one without a mask, standing outside before April 6th. Many people wearing masks saying they get a bailout, we get robbed. Look at all these people blocking the street. Where was the media to say these people are risking coronavirus? Oh, where was the outrage? Where were the protests and the condemnation from mainstream press? Did not exist. Let me show you more, man. I got it for days. Here's Hyde Park tenants threaten a rent strike as many struggle to pay due to impact of COVID-19. And of course, you have people. Let me see if I can show some of these shots of people out protesting. Now, I understand these protests aren't the biggest protests in the world. There are dozens of people at many of these, but there have been a bunch of protests, and I pointed this out in the previous segment. Standing on street corners, not social distancing, many not wearing masks. And where was the media to say something about all of these articles? Because there's more than, I pulled up like 7 or 8 or more, and that was a cursory Google search. Where was the media? Well, look, as soon as the Trump supporters come out, as soon as they wave a Gadsden flag, all of a sudden it's Nazis, it's fascism, it's morons. Yeah, they won't criticize the rent strikers on the left because the conservatives aren't the only ones protesting. To be fair, to be absolutely fair, Trump tweeted about this, creating a national spotlight. Before this, the media was criticizing these protesters, and they were substantially larger than the rent strike protests. But I'll tell you what, right now, if your analysis is going to be protesting for the freedom to catch the coronavirus, the Reopen America protests are the logical conclusion of a twisted liberty movement. What about Antifa? That's not liberty? Are you admitting now that the Antifa protesters who went out demanding we don't pay rent, that they're actually fighting for authoritarianism? Why aren't they included in your op-ed? Because they were protesting first. And they were protesting similar things. Government authority, right? Saying that we should, well, actually, no, they were protesting for more government authority. So I was wrong about that. This article I find rather fascinating because he basically just brings in Alex Jones. And it's a really short article where he talks about these protesters are being manipulated by a right-wing media machine into going out. Did you even bother talking to these people? There's a left-wing activist media group called Unicorn Riot. I know I'm friends with one of the founders, I believe. And I think they've actually produced many misleading videos. They once showed a protest in Portland, and it was a guy waving his hand at somebody, and they claimed he was doing a Hitler salute. Yeah, or whatever you want to call it. So Unicorn Riot goes out to a protest, I believe it was in Minnesota, and actually interviews some of these Trump supporters wearing Trump hats. One of the protesters said, be careful, they're very, very anti-Trump, looks to the camera guy and says, you guys do really good work, but they are anti-Trump. And I'm like, there you go, right? Respect from the protesters. And they show this in their video. So my respect to Unicorn Riot for showing this. The protesters basically say we think the pandemic is real and it's very serious, but we have a right to work. We have a right to live. So where's the rest of Antifa to come out in support of these people? Why are you bending over backwards to the authoritarian machine that is censoring our speech? So many, you know, my problem is with all of these far left protesters is I got no problem standing side by side with you when you protest the government and their authoritarian overreach. But when you've got people that are being censored on social media, what do you end up getting from these far leftists? They agree with the establishment Democrats and the left because they say, oh, well, look, these people are pro-Trump. Now Antifa's in an interesting position They can agree with the right to protest and push back on government authority, but that puts them in line with Trump and his supporters. And they won't do it because they care more about tribe. So when it really comes down to the line of whether or not you're going to oppose the fascist overreach of these massive corporations shutting down our right to protest in alignment with the government who requested this, oh, now it's embarrassing. Yeah, if you really were anti-fascist, you'd be speaking up against all of this. The nurses have a right to protest. The Extinction Rebellion have a right to protest. You want to block a street? You want to protest for this? You will be arrested, but I agree with your right to do so. You want to go march for Occupy Wall Street? You want to chant 99%? I agree with your right to do so. You want to go out and protest against the patriarchy and white male privilege? I agree with your right to do so. You want to put on a pink pussy hat, march around in DC? I agree with your right to do so. If you want to wave a Gadsden flag, an American flag, and demand an end to the shutdown because it is your right to live how you see fit, waving a sign that says my body, my choice, I agree with your right to do so. What about Antifa? Antifa has berated and insulted and slammed the protesters, calling them far right, Nazis, accusing them of all this mishmash nonsense because they are useful idiots for the authoritarians. They go around beating people who disagree. They push fringe ideology. And now when it matters most, when these tech companies are shutting down protest organizers, but it's astroturfing, they say, don't care. I don't care who's setting it up. The government has no right to request this. At a time when the government is deploying drones from Chinese companies to spy on us in our own backyards, where is Antifa? Where is the far left? Nowhere to be seen, it would seem. Standing by, insulting those that would challenge government authority. Yeah, we know who the real fascists are. Look. When the Democratic establishment and their allies in media come out and say stupid things and say like, it's good that these private companies are censoring people or outright deny it, even though they're the ones who report it in the first place, I roll my eyes. I get it. They're authoritarians. But Antifa is supposed to be anti-fascist. So why would they stand in alignment with authoritarian establishment figures? Because they're not really. And that's just the sad reality. They claim to be anti-fascist. They're not. They claim to oppose racism. They're racist. And we don't actually have activists fighting against the authoritarian takeover. I mean, actually, I would argue if you wanted to get to the root word of what anti-fascist really meant, just opposing fascism, these Trump-supporting conservatives waving Gadsden flags are the most anti-fascist protesters we actually have. Because right now, the government, multiple governments, state level, are manipulating our right to speech through a loophole. Well, the government didn't shut down your protest. You're allowed to protest, but we sure made sure no one would find out about it by requesting a private company stop you from speaking about it. And there you go. Now, I still think what the government is doing, these requests, will be a violation of the First Amendment. I think a judge will recognize states have no right to intervene to prevent a protest. That's what I think. I could be wrong. And we'll see if this goes to lawsuits, and it should. And then we'll have some precedent, and maybe in the future, the government won't be able to do what they're doing right now. But the government is locking everything down by decree, and they don't have the right to do so. And these moron police who are going out and enforcing these ridiculous rules are playing into their hands. So no, they're not defending the Constitution. If somebody, let me tell you something. If somebody goes out to protest, and a cop comes and arrests them, you know what? That's civil disobedience. These things happen. But there's a difference between someone standing on a sidewalk, minding their own business and getting arrested for arbitrary reasons, which I have always stood against. In fact, back in, I believe it was the end of 2012, there was a photographer who was standing on the sidewalk and he got arrested for arbitrary reasons. They said obstructing a road. He wasn't in the road. He was on the sidewalk. And a lawyer group, an activist lawyer group, used my footage to exonerate this man. If you are marching down the street, the police should have no right to arrest you or stop you. Now, if you go in the street and you block traffic and you're obstructing traffic, yes, you'll get a warning. You'll get another warning. You'll be arrested. That's normal. There's varying degrees to civil disobedience. What we're seeing right now are regular Americans who want their jobs reopened, who have been standing on the sidewalk, doing things they are legally allowed to do and being arrested for being out. We have seen people walking down the street, minding their own business, get arrested. We have seen people on their own property having a get-together, get arrested. We have seen a man paddleboarding by himself, get arrested. Now that is so far beyond what could be considered reasonable, I'm surprised it happened in the first place. But where are the great saviors of liberty, freedom, and cooperation, Antifa? Yeah, nowhere to be seen. Welcome to the dystopian nightmare. Drones are flying overhead, spying on us in our backyards, telling us that we must remain inside for our own safety. Meanwhile, these people in media are just acting like the bad guys are the ones who want to be free. If you want to call it, New York Times, if you want to say protesting for the freedom to catch the coronavirus, and sure, if you want to go out and you know the risks, why would I stop you? Why should it be that we should have the government mandate no one can go outside instead of saying, if you don't want the coronavirus, you don't go outside? And then they say, oh, but you're putting the elderly at risk. Well, then the elderly can just not go outside. I know they are being put at risk because even then you're going to have contamination across the board. But how do you solve this problem with the existing Constitution? The problem you seek. I don't know if there's a way to do it. You can't tell people that you can't violate the Constitution just by decree, which they've done. And you know what? As time goes on, the Constitution means less and less. And you know why that's worrying? As confidence erodes in the government, then eventually the government becomes illegitimate and people stop following its orders outright. We've already seen in Los Angeles, in New York, and other places, people are defying the lockdown orders. There were the photos of people rushing up to take pictures of the boat, violating lockdown orders. In California, traffic was reemerging. These states couldn't keep people in their homes. They don't view them as legitimate anymore. And the more you trample on the Constitution, the more people will just disregard what you say because they have no faith that anything will be upheld anyway. And that's how you breed chaos, and that's when things fall apart. At the same time, China is ramping up, and there are fears that they're preparing for war. Maybe I'll talk about that later tonight. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment will be at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. It is my main channel. It's a different channel from this one, and I'll see you all there.